Hello everyone, Freeman here. Before we probably begin, there's two things I just want to have said really quick. If you want to know what has happened over the course of time and why you haven't seen more episodes of the All Guardsmen Party and also just videos in general, then do skip to the end, as that's where you will find the reason why. If you want to just not care about it, then that's fair enough too. Secondly, I also want to thank everyone for the beautiful art that I've been receiving over the course of time. It's still nice to see, actually, that even though I haven't uploaded, things are still coming in every once in a while, and I want to appreciate it. So here you go. Thank you so much for all the awesome stuff. It's nice to see. I'm still a little bewildered that I'm getting it. Don't feel like I deserve it, but I'm very happy to get it. Regardless, I think that's where we'll end it. Let's begin. The squad has just boarded the shuttle to their next mission. Behind them are the familiar forms of the interrogator, better known as the Robert, and his manservant Alfred. As they enter the shuttle's conference room, the interrogator introduces the guardsman to the rest of the team, and begins regaling everyone with the story of his previous mission with the squad. An elderly woman, a small Weasley man, a cleric, a tall man in a duster are listening to the Robert's tale with a mixture of confusion and disbelief.
And that is how we have all done together on these lovely missions.
As pious as ever.
Yeah, at least better than the previous one.
Questionable.
Sarge is listening to the Robert and occasionally winching and muttering corrections when enthusiasm gets the better of the memory. Twitch has backed himself into a corner and is glaring at his new teammates whilst he's fiddling with a proximity mine. Doc is helping Alfred serve tea and trying to keep Cutter out of the way as the melee specialists wolf down snacks. The squad's new member, the flame trooper Crisp, is laughing heartily at the interrogator's story while thumping an uncomfortable-looking cleric on the back.
Oh, what a story. Always nice to hear something new from the fringes of the galaxy.
By the God Emperor's mercy, Crisp. Can you please stop smoking sandpaper cigarettes? Your vocal cord sounds more nasally than a Sega Saturn pattern of a servitor that has been shoved down a fucking chimney.
You lack taste, cloth botherer.
As they do, all the squad members are vaguely wondering what the Robert had meant by theological trouble.
It was bothersome the last time we tried to give the faithless a little bit extra faith, considering the bloody bitch had been dropping it all in the faith of fucking corn.
Cheer up, she's dead.
Worry yourself not, ye faithful. For this time you're spreading your love of the Emperor to an entire planet that has gone rogue. You're going to do fine.
Shit. So no shit, there we were, on our way to a planet that had separated from the Imperium for a few centuries, to ask the locals why they had turned away from the Emperor's light. This was not something we were even remotely qualified for, so we were a little confused about why we had been sent. Technically, rooting out heresy is what the Inquisition is all about, but this was an entire planet that had forgotten the Imperial Creed, not some cult of demon worshippers hiding in the sewers. We all knew this was a sort of shit the Ecclesiarchy was made for. None of us were happy with the idea that we might be edging in on their turf. After the Rob had finished his little story and had his tea, Sarge decided it was time to find out just what sort of shitstorm we were heading into. In this typical rambling fashion, our interrogator told us the tale of orc invasions, imperial retreats, scorched earth tactics, and plucky survivors. We dismissed most of it as bullshit, but the core of the matter seemed to be that a few hundred years ago a major warg had cut through the sector, forcing a general retreat. As a part of this retreat, the Imperium had strategically abandoned a planet and nuked it on the way to keep out the orcs. Now that we were finally pushing back the orcs and the radiation was fading, that planet was going to be integrated back into the Imperium. The first step of this process involved introducing as many of the survivors as possible into the God. These people were practically Deathworlders after all, and the God can always use more Deathworlders. The only problem was that these guys didn't praise the Emperor, and you can't have men like that in the God. So the Ecclesiarchy was called in and was doing its best to spread the faith and stamp out the more heretical local religions. Something they ran into spooked them, though, so now we were going in to see just how heretical these people were. To no surprise, our interrogator was an old family friend of the ship's captain, so instead of being treated as uppity form of cargo, we were welcomed as honored guests and given real quarters. It was nice traveling with the Ruppet. A guardsman can sleep anywhere, but there's something to be said for a bed with actual sheets.
It is as soft as belly of urban Vostroyan potato bear. I didn't know this was such a thing.
Don't know about that, but I gotta say, it's pretty damn nice. Although there's one thing I got to do just to spiff it up that extra bit.
So we settled into our quarters, got the perimeter defenses up, and got to know the rest of the team.
There we go. Nothing such home like some proximity mines.
Nubby's replacement in the squad was Crisp, a big jolly flamer expert who the rest of us found vaguely unsettling.
Well, isn't this lovely? I always enjoy new friends.
Just to be clear, we all liked Crisp. He had been the best damned cook in the regiment, was always laughing and joking, and could put a steam of burning promethium through the firing slits of an oncoming tank like it was nothing. He had taken the regiment's death a little bit badly, though. He had been everyone's friend, and all the deaths hit him hard. He started losing weight and stopped laughing, and had even picked up smoking after he joined the Inquisition, and from what we heard, his squad's missions had been especially horrific. Every time we saw him between deployments, he had looked worse and worse. None of us had expected him to last much longer. But something had changed on his last mission. He was eating and joking again, and loved trading stories with the Ruppet. It was just that his jokes didn't always make sense, and his smile was a bit too wide. We'd all seen guardsmen bend under pressure, and both Twitch and Cutter had practically snapped. But Crisp's fixed smile and slightly twisted humor worried the rest of us.
Hey, Twitch, what do you call a planet that has been doused in a firestorm after a planet cracker hit it?
Fucking dead.
Close. Sauteed.
Yeah, right.
The rest of the team was less disturbing than Crisp. The Ruppet and Alfred were the same as we remembered them, except for the masterwork augmentic that had replaced the Ruppet's charred stump of an arm. Our interrogator had handpicked several experts for this mission, in addition to us guardsmen. For working with the locals, there were an Arbite who had been experienced in keeping the peace on feral and frontier worlds, as well as a greaser man who had served as a translator and negotiator on a rogue trader. The religious investigation would be aided by a cleric who had worked as a missionary for several years, and a tiny old woman of an adept who knew just about everything. We liked her. She didn't take shit of anybody and delighted in making Doc and Alfred uncomfortable.
So, what are you beauties doing around this part of the galaxy?
Anything but you, frankly.
I agree with that general statement.
We didn't even bother trying to keep ourselves walled off from the rest of the team. After our last mission with the Ruppet, we knew that he wouldn't let us get away with it. We suffered through lectures on Imperial Creed and acceptable deviations from the Cleric and Adept, basic language lessons from the Greaseball and Adept, and lessons on frontier law from the Arbite, and, of course, the Adept. It was like being back in school, right down to the little old lady hitting us when we didn't pay attention.
Oh, what the hell? Which Hubert Jr.? Are you eating your own boogers?
With my good and brigham right, I am! Oh!
Well, then take a tissue, dear, and blow your nose dry.
You're not letting some witch steal my fluids now!
The whole experience was rather degrading. Aside from Doc, no one of us were cut out for high learning. We were guardsmen, not blooded diplomats. We couldn't duck out of it, though, so we spent the whole trip like a bunch of officer cadets busting our asses in PT and being force-fed trivia by frustrated teachers all day, listening to the ramblings of an old warhorse in the evening, and sleeping like the dead all night. The trip slowly continued, and we suffered, but at least we knew that we'd be ready for anything the mission threw at us. Compared to this torture, purging a bunch of heretics could be a walk in the park. We made planetfall at the fortified camp that the surveyors were using as their main shuttle port. The place was within spitting distance of one of the irradiated cities. and it was disconcerting to see the tower standing completely motionless and silent in the distance. The various leaders of the expedition came to greet us, and for a change, everyone seemed happy to see the Inquisition. It was weird.
Well, mark my words, never have I seen anyone happy to see us.
It could be a nice change.
No, it's not.
We spent the next few days wining and dining with Minatorum, Ecclesiarchy, Administratum, and Mechanicus officials of various degrees of unpleasantries. We managed to not thoroughly embarrass ourselves, but for some reason none of the survey's leaders was willing to tell us the exact reason that we had been summoned. We got a lot of vague and contradictory information, but everyone seemed to have a political agenda here and wanted to make sure we'd act in their interest before they told us anything useful. We couldn't even find the Pontifex who had asked for our help. Apparently he had gone off to negotiate with some local priests and hadn't come back yet. We didn't have time for this shit, so we decided to stop pussyfooting around and find someone who didn't have their head stuck up their ass. Seems like a fruitless thing to do with politicians, but whatever. While the Ruppin and Alfred kept the obnoxious bigwigs busy, we decided to split into pairs to find various assistants and secretaries that did the actual work. When we found them, we shook them down for information. Doc and the Adept talked to the Mechanicus, while the Arbite and the Greaseball asked the Administratum some questions. The Cockboys and Pencil Pushers didn't really have anything useful for us. Just a lot of junk about radiation levels, incoming colonists, recovering biospheres, and irradiated manufactorums. The rest of the team had better luck getting useful intel, except for Twitch, who was still left in base because he was still banned from investigating anything ever again.
The only reason you don't like me is because you know that I'm right. But don't worry, you'll come back. You'll come back.
Sergeant Cutter managed to find a very helpful lad working in the Minatorum who knew all about the locals. Apparently they were the hardest bastards this side of the Catachan, had a very clear memory of who nuked them into the Stone Age and had been spending the last few hundred years rebuilding their civilization and fighting with the remnants of the Orcish invasion. They built several small cities, mostly of the underground bunkers that had sheltered their forefathers, which they defended with a mixture of primitive weaponry and scavenged Imperial tech. The locals weren't overly hostile towards the Imperium, since most of them saw re-assimilation as a great improvement over their current living conditions, but they had abandoned the Imperial faith and developed about 50 different religions of their own. Crisp and the cleric, who were paired for obvious reasons, had to search the entire Ecclesiarchic camp before they found someone useful. A sister Dialogus who had been keeping track of everything. According to her, the Ecclesiarcha had been spreading the Imperial Creed with a fair degree of success before shit went south. In a single night, nearly all of the active missionaries had been attacked by assassins or angry mobs. But the Minatorum missionaries are tough bastards, and several of them killed their attackers and made their escape. In response to these attacks, a few squads of Sisters of Battle were deployed to sort things out. A little examination of the deceased assassins led them to one of the smaller religions near the irradiated city. The sisters went in, some shit went down, let's just say, and about half the sisters came back out. They declared the place purged when it was put under quarantine, and they called us. None of this was exactly good news, but at least we knew the gist of what was going on and where to go next. A flyer was requisitioned, and we all headed out to talk to the sisters.
You hear that, Clothsack? We're gonna talk to some Sisters of Battle that are most likely hotter than ignited promethium.
I will still pray for mercy on them and your vocal cords.
Hey, I can quit when I want.
We geared up for a fight as we flew. Whatever the sisters had run into had chewed them up pretty badly, and we weren't going to take their word it was dead. We landed right at the edge of one of the nuked cities. We were going close enough that all of us had to wear rebreathers, and Doc warned us not to stay too long if we ever wanted to have children.
See, I told you you would need me for a mission.
Well, when Doc said that this place acts like a radioactive contraceptive, we immediately thought of bringing you.
I don't know if you know this, but I know fuck all about radiation.
No, but you know about sticking your dick where it doesn't belong, so we thought we'd give the galaxy some fucking mercy and have you not being able to bring more of yourself into it. The sisters had set up perimeter around a large ruined building, and had set up field barracks too. As we approached, a senior sister came out, and the Ruppet flashed his rosette. The sister superiors took us forward to the ruined building and filled us in as we walked. She had been sent there with 3 squads to purge the temple. They had rolled over the guards and busted down the door in seconds. They had expected to find cultists and fanatics inside. They hadn't expected a horde of mutants backed up by psychos. You gotta live by the sisters' credit for a sheer bloody perseverance. They stood their ground and killed them all, taking 50% casualties in the process, but completing the objective. Poor dumb zealots. That's the sort of shit is what the Emperor gave us indirect fire support for. The reason we were called was apparent the second we were entering the building. Sitting on the wall behind the altar, glowing like a big glowy thingy, was a mark of Tzeentch. Underneath it, there were much smaller marks of Nurgle, Khorne, and Slaanesh, and above it all was the symbol of Chaos Undivided. Sarge started swearing under his breath. Our training had been fairly clear on what to do in this sort of situation. We asked the Adept and the Cleric to take a look while the rest of us averted our eyes. When they were done, Crisp moved forward and drenched the whole thing in burning promethium, while Twitched prepared a jetpack. Suddenly, the Sister Superior hit Crisp in the side with our flying tackle, a second before a tentacle whipped out of the burned mark and spread the spot where we had been standing with ooze. As we watched, a dozen more tentacles squirmed out and the Sister screamed at us to run or fight. We chose both. We all backpedaled madly whilst pouring a steady stream of last fire into the writhing mass, but the tentacles were emerging faster than we could shoot them. The Interrogator and the Sister's Bolter were the ones that had the best effect, so it was no surprise that several of the larger tentacles slashed out at them. The Ruppet drew his sword and parried the ones who were aimed at him, but the Sister was knocked to the ground, and clawed tentacles seized her by the leg. Cutter saw his chance and started hacking at the limb, dragging her away, while Crisp seized her by the arms and pulled her to safety. The tentacles were all focused on Cutter and Ruppet now, who were both carving at any limb that came near them. They were actually starting to push forward, and it was a fair bet that they could take the thing on and win. But we didn't feel like taking the risk, so we all popped the thing with frag grenades. The grenade barrage severed the tentacles at the base and gave both Cutter and the Ruppet the time they needed to fall back to the rest of us. We all slowly backed to the doorway as the tentacles grew and vainly tried to reach us. When we all had exited, the mass withdrew into the mark, which resumed glowing. None of us had any real desire to go back to the temple, but the Chaos Marks couldn't really be left there. The Ruppet told Sarge to take the squad and figure out a way to get rid of them, while the rest of the team took the wounded Sister Superior to her barracks. As they walked into the large tent that undoubtedly contained several heart checks, changing out of their hot, sweaty armor, we stood around and argued on how to deal with the tentacle demon. There's no bloody justice in the galaxy. Several of us were in favor of calling down an orbital strike. I mean, what's the point of being in the Inquisition if you can't go completely overkill after all? Sarge disagreed though, so we all took a walk around to the side of the temple. Sarge proceeded to slap jetpacks onto the back of the wall of the marks, but Twitch raised concern about getting separated through the brickwork while the charges were planted. These were valid points, so while Twitch prepped several jetpacks with adhesive, Sarge had the rest of us root around the rubble for any pipes or beams we could use to get our hands on, then tape them together. Imagine, if you will, a 40-foot pole made of taped-together scrap metal. Now imagine there's a jetpack stuck to the end of it, and 5 sweating guardsmen holding up at the other end. Who knows what the sisters watching the perimeter thought of us. It worked, though. Mostly. We stuck 5 jetpacks to the back of the wall of the temple, right behind where the mark was, and only dropped 2 of them onto the ground. We all fell back to safe distance, took cover, and hit the detonator.
All right, everyone ready? Here it goes! Who the hell is that?
I don't even know this guy. When we peeked out of cover, the wall was gone, along with the marks and half the temple. With our heads held high, we headed back to the barracks to inform the interrogator, hoping against hope that there still might be some hot, undressed chicks inside.
Fuck Cutter! I get you want to tussle with a muscle. But don't ruin this for the rest of us.
Yeah, enough of your shit, Cutter, and reveal the secrecy! Yeah, shit. The fuck are you screeching about? Finally, I've seen the light.
Unfortunately, there weren't any half-naked sisters in the barracks when we got there, but we did get to see Doc have a heart attack.
Angels exists.
Well, it wasn't really a heart attack, but it was damn close though. The first thing we saw when we entered was the Sister Superior lying on a table as a Sister Hospitaller treated her bloody leg. The second Doc laid ice on the Hospitaller, he started hyperventilating and tried to hide behind Sarge.
I must talk with her.
Can I help you?
So that's the sound of a mound breaking!
Fucking pathetic.
Unfortunately, God-issue rebreathers aren't exactly quiet devices. All conversation in the tent was halted by what sounded like a metal grate being attacked with a push broom.
Is your friend okay?
No, not really. I think he's dead.
Right.
Everyone, including the Sister Superior, turned to face Doc, who started to turn an alarming shade of crimson, and clawed his mask. Crisp and the old adept broke into gales of laughter as the Hospitaller ran over to see what was wrong with Doc. Only Sarge's assurance that everything was fine saved the poor boy from terminal embarrassment. The rest of us removed our masks, then Sarge, grinning like a schoolboy, gave a report to the Ruppet that was occasionally interrupted by inexplicable coughing fits. These usually happened when he looked at Doc. Matters were not helped by both the Adept and Crisp making dirty jokes about playing doctor in the background. Eventually, Sarge finished the explaining of our solution to the demon problem and proceeded to introduce the rest of the team to the Hospitaller we had met on our first mission. When the novelty of teasing Doc had worn off and he had regained his composure, the embarrassed medic went over to help patch up the Sister Superior's leg. While he did this, the rest of us argued what the hell was going on this planet. We knew the planet was filled with mundane heresy and had to expect to have to deal with some minor demon cult, but this had been a full-blown Tzeentchian temple right down to the arcane symbols, horrific mutants and terrible tentacle monsters. On top of that, the other chaos symbols seemed to suggest that each of the gods had a cult on this world, and they were all working in one way or another together. It was a wonder that the planet hadn't been sucked into the warp or something at this point. The elderly adept suggested tracking down the other cults and purging them. Our squad was in favor of sitting tight and calling for reinforcements, and the cleric wanted to exterminate the planet on general principle. Eventually, the Ruppet settled on the matter in the adept's favor, causing the cleric to storm out of the tent while the adept clacked and made obscene gestures at his back. We weren't exactly in favor of his plan, but we had expected it. The Ruppet wasn't the sort of man to back down from a challenge. And of course he won't care if our lives are at stake.
You would be surprised to hear he actually somewhat cares.
Wait, seriously?
Yes, he's a fucking baby.
Of course, finding these cults wouldn't be easy. These were heretics hiding from the Imperium. It's not like they advertised and gave out pamphlets. It would take tireless searching, careful examination of evidence, and a brilliant deduction to find the hidden temples. It was a near impossible task.
Hey boys, I think I found what we're looking for.
And within 5 minutes, Crisp found a pamphlet advertising the pit of carnival pleasures and demonic delights, sitting on a table in the temple. Can't we just fucking die like guardsmen and call it a day? The pamphlet and its intriguing contents was handed over to the adepts and the cleric for inspection. They confirmed that this was almost certainly the Slaneshi cult we were looking for, so we collected our gear and got ready to pay the place a visit. The sisters were also getting ready to leave as well. They had shown us the marks and the temple was pretty much wrecked, so the perimeter was no longer necessary. They were going to assist the Pontifex in his negotiations with one of the local religious orders, but they gave us their contact code so we could vox them if they could provide us with backup.
Why am I such a bumbling buffoon?
Hey, you alright?
Yes, I'm all... I'm alright, thanks.
Right.
Yeah. We're just on our way out to check the code.
Check to see what you can find. And if things get rough, you can reach me on this frequency.
Oh, thank you. I certainly will, if things gone alright.
The adept even congratulated Doc on getting the pretty girl's number. Kinda cute, actually. The pamphlet pointed us towards a bunker underneath one of the largest towns that had been built by the survivors. By the Wastelanders' standards, this was a rich settlement. It was a major local trade hub and had a fair-sized standing army to keep things civil. There had been some imperial contact and trade with the local nobility, so we probably wouldn't be shot on sight. But we didn't think they'd be so keen on us purging the bunker. The Ruppet was all for marching in, declaring our authority, and having the local knobs aid us in our mission. The rest of us thought this sounded like a good way to get ourselves killed. We argued the point with them and eventually came to a compromise. The Ruppert and a few others would fly in and be all diplomatic, while the rest of the team would be coming in disguised and check out the local cult. The plan called for the Ruppert to make friends and slowly work the town's leaders up to the idea of helping us over with a few knobs. If we ran into anything chaosy, we'd call for him and he'd convince the locals to help us. None of the squad had any faith in his ability to convince the Wastelanders to side with us, so we had absolutely no intention of calling him for anything short of a bloodthirster. We stopped at a small trade post and exchanged a few of our surplus weapons for sets of local clothing and armor. The Arbite and the Greaseball helped us get into disguise and prepped us with local slangs and customs. Then we split up and had a few hours of a walk outside of town. The diplomatic team consisted of the Ruppet and Alfred, as well as the Greaseball and the Cleric. They had a full spectrum of diplomatic skills at their disposal, and the two teammates that most annoyed us were out of our hair. At goddamn last. As the rest of us started the long hike to the town behind the Arbite, we speculated on what sort of trouble the diplomatic team would get into. Twitch thought they were all going to be sacrificed to the dark gods. Crisp painted some rather scandalous scenarios involving the Greaseball that made us rather uncomfortable just hearing about it, and the rest of us had our money on the Ruppet challenging someone to a duel. The Adept had a few interesting theories of her own, but the Arbite ignored us and muttered to himself about standards and professionalism.
It is a matter of standards and professionalism, something that you all seem to be lacking.
Entirely fair, but you forget one thing. Professionals have standards. Masters and cannon fodder don't need any.
Am I ought to guess which ones you are, then?
No need to guess. You'll see it right in front of you when you know.
Guess I'll be wearing my blood splatter visor.
The Arbite talked us through the town's gates as mercenary escorts for the Adept. Between our scrap armor and well-suited weaponry, we certainly looked the part. There was a bit of an argument over bringing Crisp's flamer inside the settlement. A quick bribe and a close look at the used weaponry, we certainly looked the part. There was a bit of an argument over Crisp's flamer being brought inside the settlement, but a quick bribe and a close look at Cutter's chainsword sorted that out through and through. Once inside, it was damned easy to find the pit of carnal pleasures and demonic delights. Apparently, it was the major attraction around here. Unfortunately, it was a lot harder to get into than to find. Several armed guards were stationed around the large vault door that served as the entrance to the bunker, and they refused to let us in with our weapons. We entered a room for the night and tried to find out a way to get into the pit without abandoning our weapons or bringing the entire settlement down on us. None of us were stealthy enough to sneak in. We couldn't find any alternative entrances, and the guards were notoriously unbribable. The only thing we could think of was trying to hide our weapons inside our clothing, but after our previous meeting with the guards, they were sure to search us through. We agonized over this for several hours before the Adept came to our rescue. She was sure she would carry handguns for each of us past the guards, along with any small gadgets we needed.
Now, don't you all worry. I have the best of ways to ensure that we will enter this new little fangled place. You know, considering what kind of cult we're trying to infiltrate, I really don't want to think that. Oh, don't you worry. You're not going to have to imagine anything. You're, however, going to see it.
Let's just say that the men were not too enthused about this idea.
I'll take the setting of There's Only War any day of the week, as long as I don't have to see that shit ever again.
The next evening we returned to the pit, not as individual customers, but as escorts for the adept. The guards did a double take at this. Their usual clientele probably didn't include any tiny old woman, and nothing could have prepared them for how the adept acted. We knew the adept was feisty, from personal experience, and we had all heard her tease Doc. But the things that came out of her mouth was having us standing slack-jawed. We were all searched for weapons and cleared without incident. We had searched Twitch ourselves earlier, just to be sure. Leaving just the adept in her robes, she loudly cackled and demanded that he shoved her inside and actually closed the vault door behind us. We heard gagging sounds from inside the hatch.
Fuck's sake, this was not a part of the description for There Is Only War. What the fuck?
Inside the bunker, there was just a large freight elevator flanked by an open stairway leading down to the depths. As we rode down, Crisp complimented the adept on getting us past the Slaaneshi cultists.
Oh, those weren't Slaaneshi cultists.
Wait, they weren't.
No, just some dumb muscle. I'm honestly a little disappointed. I had this whole plan worked out for getting past them.
And that plan was?
Well, first I was going to seduce them all.
Crisp fell over laughing while the rest of us tried not to vomit. The adept fished our weapons and emergency gadgets out of her robes, and we all tried not to notice how warm they were, as we were stashing them inside our own clothing. The freight elevator rumbled to a stop in a large, dimly lit room. We cautiously exited and took a stock of the situation. There was almost no light, only one door, and the walls and ceilings above us seemed to have some sort of fresco painted on them. Keeping our hands near our concealed weapons, we slowly headed for the door we could see. As we reached the center of the room, a pair of figures came through the door, and dozens of lights illuminated the pictures around us. We had some concerns about whether this was a Slaaneshi cult, when the adepts told us the gods weren't cultists, but what we saw painted in that room put those doubts to rest. Scenes of debauchery and sadism adored every surface, each one more vile and heretical than the last. We all stopped and stared, completely ignoring the two figures approaching us. Sarge stood bolt upright and held completely still, while Twitch crouched on the floor, muttering to himself, and Doc stared at his feet and blushed like a schoolgirl. Both Crisp and the adept examined the images like art critics, and Cutter just didn't get it. But the Arbite was lying on the floor praying. We were shaken out of our trance by two voices speaking to us in perfect harmony. A pair of naked women were walking towards us, smiling and asking what we were truly desiring in our hearts. Down on the floor, we heard the Arbite start crying. Both of them were supernaturally beautiful and sounded like angels. A single word from either of them could convince a man to kill his entire family.
I'm getting ridiculously tired of this shit.
The second they came within arm's reach, Cutter buried his knife into the woman's neck and shot the other one.
Damn, Cutter. I know you got the way with the sword, but I didn't think you were this quick.
It is as I've said before. Titties are temporary.
This quick burst of violence was followed by a short, whispered debate about what to do next. We had a few handguns, a couple of knives, and a handful of dead packs, and a whole bunker full of cultists to deal with. This is where a typical Inquisition strike force would have ventured into the temple and purged the entire place using nothing but some silenced handguns and their wits. We did not decide to do this. We preferred life. The elevator wouldn't budge, but the adept refused to take to the stairs, so we all got into firing positions around Twitch while he fiddled with the control console. We were all on edge, and any second the rest of the temple would notice the two missing cultists and come for us. Our nerves were not helped by Crisp pointing out a picture of a man being pierced by what appeared to be an obscene power weapon, or the adept pointing out a few women who looked like Doc's lady friend. A horde of ranged cultists never came, though. Twitch bypassed the lock on the elevator relatively quickly, and we all piled on. As we rode up, we took a few dead packs we had brought with and stuck them to the shaft's walls. The general theory was to call in an orbital strike when we got clear, but it wouldn't do to have anyone follow us. So we reached to the vault doors without any alarms going off and used the built-in comm system to nicely ask the guards to let us out. As we came out of the doors, the guards all caught sight of the adept and took a step back. We left the building without incident, and as soon as we were clear, we calmed the diplomatic team and sprinted for the rented rooms we had stashed our weapons in. We grabbed our gear, headed to the parked flyer, and got aboard as Twitch jetpacks went off. We could hear small arms fire blinking off the belly of the flyer as we lifted into the air and got the hell away from there.
Hey, I can't really complain. That was a job actually well done for once.
The Ruppet was a little cross about the whole thing. He had been working hard at winning the locals over, and had expected a report of our progress and a request for a local strike team, not a message to drop everything and evacuate. According to him, the local baron and his cronies were fine, upstanding gentlemen, eager to mend forces with the Imperium and perfectly willing to lend us some lads who could keep their gobs shut. Alfred slightly shook his head in the background, and did his best to indicate that the gentleman would have had us all killed, looted, and possibly eaten. Regardless of how well the Ruppet had actually been doing at winning the locals over, setting off a few jetpacks in their primary tourist attraction had definitively pissed them off. The interrogator complained bitterly about all his diplomatic work being wasted, and how hard it would be to get his own town back in good terms with the Imperium. Our request for an orbital strike on the bunker didn't improve his mood. We got quite the lecture about a soldier's responsibility to face danger and protect civilians. If it weren't for the steady hail of small arms fire that bounced off the belly of our flyer as we took off, he would have probably ordered us all to go back down. With Alfred's help, Sarge managed to finally calm down the Ruppet and convince him to call in the strike. As we flew back to the surveyor's camp, we saw a series of flashes in the distance, and a confirmation was voxed in from one of the frigates patrolling the system. It was a shame we didn't have any plans for the bunker, just an estimate on the depth and direction from the entrance shaft. They wound up burning down twice as far as we estimated and walked their lance battery in a pretty wide area to be sure the bunker was wrecked. The barrage also wiped out half the town.
You did what?
The Ruppet was a little bit sore about that. When we landed back at the base, the interrogator went off to work on damage control. As he left, he was muttering to himself about political impact of calling in land strikes on the survivors of a planet-wide orbital bombardment. We felt a little bad about that, but hey, we were still alive and mostly sane.
What? Huh?
I said mostly. Anyway, Carter didn't do this lame detective stuff, and Doc knew when he was out of his depth. They both wanted to call in some help. Crisp put forward the rather disturbing plan of lightly bombarding all the mapped settlements and seeing if any fought back with demons or sorcery.
I mean, we got napalm.
He laughed afterwards, so it was probably a joke.
Yeah.
Probably.
We got napalm.
Twitch thought the entire planet was one massive cult and we needed to call in the Inquisition. When we pointed out that we were the Inquisition, he suggested that we call the Double Inquisition. The Inquisition that inquisits the Inquisition.
'Cause no one expects the Inquisition. And that's a good idea.
We put that down as another vote for calling in reinforcements. Sarge wouldn't have any of that, though. He was certain the Ruppet wouldn't call for help unless things got absolutely dire, so he wouldn't embarrass the whole team by asking until we had exhausted all available options. The only major source of clues we could think of had just turned into a pit of slag and glass. This just left talking to people and searching through records. Neither of these were our strong suit, so we just dumped that job on the rest of the team. They quickly established that while most of the survivors didn't know anything useful, the ecclesiarch's scribes and that one sister Dialogus had records on all the local religions. Oh boy, the ecclesiarchy won't like that. Anyway, while the adept and the rest poured through the piles of tedious documentation, we did minimal social network that was needed to keep the Ruppet happy. and tried to stay out of anyone's way. Unfortunately, bold guardsmen have a way of getting into trouble. Twitch kept to himself and did his usual thing, while Sarge tried to keep everyone out of trouble in one shape. Crisp and Cutter spent their time cooking for the camp and hitting innocent training dummies with a sword repeatedly. Doc spent more and more time using the base's long-range secure Vox to talk to the Hospitaller while she helped the sisters with whatever they were doing. It was probably a grievous misuse of his inquisitorial authority, but hey.
So that's what we've been up to recently.
You work well, Doc.
Thank you. Shit, I gotta go.
Don't worry. I'll see you later.
Titties are temporary. One night, unexpectedly, he then came and asked us if we wanted to go down and lend the sisters a hand. Apparently there was some minor trouble at one of the larger settlements, and having some big, strong men around would make things so much better. We all snickered at the lame excuse and packed our bags.
This is so fucking stupid.
Well, hey, at least Doc is happy.
Happy being a simp.
It was remarkably easy to get the Rupper to let us off the hook. We weren't really doing anything productive at the base, and liaising with the ecclesiarchy sounded like something we should be doing. Yet, he sent us off with his blessing on a transport that was taking supplies out to the sisters. We didn't even bother informing the rest of the team. Doc would have died of embarrassment if we had told the adept. We were all ready to do our duty as fellow soldiers and wingmen, and we could vainly throw ourselves on whatever psychotic battle nuns were in the area, while Doc went in for the kill. A few hours later, we were all in a full biohazard suit and acting as nurses in feral world plague wards. Thanks, Doc.
I'm sorry.
In retrospect, we really should have been looking more closely at the crates we had been sitting on during the flight. Every one of them was filled with medical supplies or building material. The moment the transport landed, the Hospitaller and a few of her friends started bossing us around. They used that medical corpsman tone of voice that every guardsman is trained to obey. We went from highly trained inquisitorial agents to obedient grunts in seconds. Before any of us could figure out what was going on, we'd built a field hospital, been crammed into a biohazard suit, and were being ordered around by a bunch of scary doctor women. The field hospitals were actually pretty large. It wasn't just us and the medical sisters. There were several ecclesiarchy doctors and workers running around, too. We weren't really expected to help with the medical procedures, thank the Emperor. Instead, we were moving bodies and equipment around and calming down some of the less happy patients. We could see why they wanted a few guardsmen around. Some of the locals were very unhappy about their treatment for some reason. We all got a few bruises keeping them still, and Twitch nearly lost a finger to a biter.
I hate the syringe. Oh no, but come on. I hate you too. Hey, don't worry. Come on now, we're all friends here. All you need to do is calm down. Now let me pet your little head. Ah, you son of a bitch! Give me back my finger! Give me back my finger!
The day crawled on, and we toiled and fought with angry patients, while Doc worked shoulder to shoulder with the Hospitaller. We gave him a dirty look every chance we could get, but he didn't seem to notice. Eventually, there was a lull in the flow of patients, and all of us except Doc stepped out for a minute. What we saw surprised the hell out of us. The field where discharged patients were being laid was filled with empty spots, while a pile of corpses behind the hospital had grown unbelievably large, and the Sisters of Battle were having trouble holding back a very angry mob. It occurred to us that there's probably more important things we should be doing than helping Doc get some.
And what the hell are you doing?
I was just helping the Hospitaller.
Doc, we ain't got bloody time for that. We got things charging the fucking gates and...
Oh boy.
Shit. Oh, shit, 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 shit!
Away from me, what the hell?
We ran back inside, grabbed Doc and the Hospitaller and asked them just what the hell was going on here. The Hospitaller explained that during their mission here, she had encountered several people showing signs of highly virulent but curable diseases. She had immediately called in all available personnel to contain the sickness and save as many people as possible. The sheer number of locals infected was staggering, though, as was the variety of diseases afflicting them. It was amazing that there were any still alive. Doc claimed to have encountered over 50 different diseases throughout the day. The patient he was currently working on had no less than 10 of them, including rock lung, green death, and Grox pox, all of which should have been instantly fatal. The hospital helpfully pointed out that Grox pox was actually a disease that was afflicting Grox and not humans, but confirmed that there was no way that the patient should be alive, much less sitting up and cheerfully scratching his boils.
His balls?
No, boils. You know, the sores and shit.
Oh, yeah, those.
Yeah. Anyway, while Twitch laughed about the Groxpox, a heavily blushed doc administered the drug cocktail that would suppress the patient's numerous diseases. We all watched in horror as the man fell over, twitching and screaming. Doc muttered something about not being such a baby, then called for a stretcher and moved on to the next patient. Sarge pondered on the fact that the squad's medical officer not only diagnosed a human with livestock disease, but also didn't see anything strange about this cure, leaving the patient in much worse shape. He vaguely wondered if all the interrogators and the other inquisitorial agents who had dismissed the squad as a bunch of booming idiots didn't have a point.
Strange, wouldn't it be, Doc? I mean, there are a bunch of patients that are infected with various diseases that should have killed them outright. Then they're sitting here and being jolly about it, when they don't like the medicine they're getting. Sounds like things are getting a little bit strange, don't you think?
Yes, I agree. Oh, it's probably mutating. It's probably the reason why things are going this way. Ow!
Doc, you're a fucking idiot. We're moving.
But I'm not done yet.
We're moving.
Okay.
Sarge's reverie lasted about a second. Then he smacked Doc upside the head and bawled him out for not connecting any of this with the fact that there was a Nurgle cult on the planet somewhere.
What the hell? Twitch, Cutter, go and check out what's going on. You're following me.
Roger.
The reaming was interrupted by the sound of bolter fire from outside. We all grabbed our weapons and rushed out to see what was going down. Either the mob or the sisters doing crowd control had snapped, so the Sister Superior and her squads were all pouring bolt fire onto an onrushing tide of angry locals. It should have been over quickly. The first few ranks of angry civvies should have been mowed down, and everyone else should have remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. But they didn't stop coming, though. Every one of them the sisters shot was simply trampled down by another as the mob pressed forward, baying for blood.
Only the living are meant to rise twice. Let's fuck them.
What?
Shoot them!
If they had been guardsmen with lasguns, things might have gone poorly for the sisters, but a bolter packs a bit more of a punch, and power armor tends to shrug off little things like thrown bricks or small arms fire. They held the position and mowed down wave after wave of what we were beginning to suspect were Nurglite cultists. We watched them for a while purely to make sure they didn't need our help, not because we found a bunch of hot chicks holding the line to be incredibly sexy or anything. But then our attention was grabbed by screams coming from the direction of the discharged patients. Several of the patients were rising to their feet and staggering towards the hospital or the sisters. As we watched one of the ecclesiarchy workers try to get a patient to lie down, the patient responded by tackling to the ground and tearing at the poor man's biohazard suit with oozing hands. We promptly shot the cultist off of him, and Sarge loudly ordered everyone who wanted to live to lie down and hold still. Something like 2 of them did, the rest kept coming. So we started shooting them all. Doc and the hospitaller were not happy about how we were solving the problem. But hey, they can't judge us. The cultists were surprisingly durable. Nothing short of a headshot or dismemberment seemed to keep them down. So we took our time and went for kill shots while Cutter and Crisp kept them from getting too close. These poor suckers didn't have anything on Tyranids or orcs. We finished them off without them laying a single hand on us. But a few of the ecclesiarchy boys had been caught in the middle of them. We got most of them out alive, though, except the one Twitch accidentally shot, but no one besides us saw that, so it didn't really count. Once the initial threat was handled, we turned our attention towards securing the perimeter and calling for backup. The cultists outside were still trying to get past the sisters, but the fact that their dead completely choked the main entrance kept them at a trickle. Twitch bought the sisters some more ammo and went to work on the rest of the perimeter, while Cutter and Crisp handled the corpses inside the compound. It was sort of disgusting watching them pile up the bodies and roast them in a massive bonfire. Especially since Crisp kept cracking up over something.
A good winter morning is a good excuse to start a fire.
Doc and the Hospitaller were put in charge of a few patients who hadn't tried to kill us. Doc seemed a little depressed over the whole thing, which is understandable. As first aids go, it left a lot to be desired. Once Sarge was sure everyone was doing something productive, he got a Vox and contacted the rest of the team. The Ruppet was not happy when we asked him about the possibility of getting another orbital strike. We settled in for the night while the Ruppet got the rest of the team together and had a final formal dinner with the surveyors. It wasn't that bad, really. Sure, we're sitting in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, but we all had biohazard gear, help was on the way, and the perimeter was secured like nobody's business. We weren't able to completely slack off, though. We had to keep up a rotation with the sisters, since the cultists were still periodically rushing to the entrance, and Nurglings were starting to claw their way out of the pile of corpses that choked the entrance. Despite them being horrific abominations of the warp, we sort of liked the Nurglings. They weren't very dangerous compared to any of the other demons out there. They made amusing popping sounds when you killed them, and they were the final proof that this was a chaos cult and not some colossal screw-up on our part. We would have sat there killing those disgusting little things all night, but the sisters didn't seem to like them though, so we eventually sent Crisp forward to torch the heaps of diseased corpses. As the disgusting smoke rolled over us, we all thanked the Emperor and the Hospitaller for our biohazard gear. The flames finally convinced the cultists to give it a rest, and things stayed relatively quiet until morning, when we heard several flies in the distance. The transports landed near the hospital and disgorged several crates of supplies and a bunch of troopers in biohazard gear, while a few light flyers scouted the settlement. Finally, the spiffy flyer our team had been using landed near the main entrance. The Ruppet stepped out, congratulating us on holding the line, and asked for status report.
Tally-ho, gentlemen. Right, let us hear the status report.
Yes, sir. A lot of dead civilians, as to be expected, and we also found a chaos cult.
What?
We all felt fairly smug as Sarge delivered the report. No one had expected us to find one of the cults on this trip, but we responded professionally and quickly when the cultists showed up. The Ruppet seemed pretty happy with our report. He happily announced that the only thing that was left to do were to identify the source of all this disease and purge it. We all winced at the thought of walking through a settlement filled with cultists and minor demons. But orders were orders, so we started gearing up for a walk across town.
Wait a minute, so things are still not over.
Doesn't seem like it. You know what, let's give it a listen, actually. Ah. Oh, it seems to be over. For now.
Oh boy.
Luckily, we never had to go for that walk. After a few minutes, one of the scout flyers reported a large group of cultists heading towards the hospital. It wasn't an attack this time. A large shield was carried into the square outside our compound, and from behind it came a fledgling voice demanding to talk to our leader. Our knee-jerk reaction was just to blow the shit out of them. Unfortunately, the Ruppet was there and ordered us to hold our fire while he talked to them.
Where the hell are you going?
What are you doing?
No, wait, don't go forward.
With the Greaseball's help, our interrogator actually began talking to the Chaos cultists and started trying to negotiate a face-to-face conversation. To the surprise of everyone present, he succeeded. An old withered cultist came out from behind the covering of people, followed by a giant man with a sword that was unmistakably a plague-bearer demon. We knew how this was going to end, or at least, we hoped we did. So while the Ruppet started debating with the Heretic, we got ready for a fight.
Well, Sarge, what's your command?
Operation Buenos Aires. Kill them all.
Oh, boy.
The Ruppet was holding everyone's attention nicely. No one even noticed as we turned around the team's flyer so that the side door was facing the negotiations. While Sarge stayed in the flyer, the rest of us casually cleared everyone out of the way, got Cutter and Alfred in position to grab the interrogator, and waited for our cue. Before long, the cultist's leader had the plague-bearer pull a disease-riddled corpse from behind the shield. He yelled something about Pointefix's god not protecting him while his faith in Nurgle had made him strong. He seemed to think that killing the local religious head was a pretty persuasive argument for conversion. The Ruppet immediately called the man a vile heretic, drew his power sword, and started to rush forward. He didn't get 3 feet before Cutter and Alfred hit him on the side and dragged his dumbass out of the firing line.
All right, Twitch, the line is clear. Do it!
Just give me the line and the pleasure will be mine. Oh, I so enjoy these dangerous moments. All right, children, time for your tricks and treats.
As soon as he was clear, Sarge slammed open the flyer's door and opened up with the sign-mounted heavy bolter. The rest of us supplemented this with frags and last fire, while the sisters advanced with their bolters. Plague bearers are supposed to be tough, but it takes more than a little toughness to survive a heavy bolter backed by grenades. Within seconds, it was reduced to a greasy stain on the ground, alongside with the cultist leader. The big mother with the sword was a different story. He had sprinted forward when the Ruppet drew and was dodging and weaving and close to melee range. Cutter revved his chainsword and got ready, then was incredibly disappointed when a bolt round took out the charging cultist's knee. We stood around and watched as the maimed cultist swordsman screamed out that his tribe was killing us all and adding our skulls to the skull throne. Crisp asked just which tribe he was talking about, and the dumbass told us.
Right.
Then Sarge shot him, and we discussed our next steps.
So where we go now?
The Ruppet was very understanding about his rough treatment by Alfred and Cutter, and was quite happy when we reported the location of the Cornet cult. The large force of cultists the Flyer had reported fell back after we killed their leader, but we couldn't just leave them running around. We needed to neutralize this cult before we could go and hunt down the Cornets. We were debating exactly how much purging was necessary, when the Adept eventually chimed in. She suggested that since we had removed the cult's leadership, and that was probably their only demon, a full Inquisition team wasn't really necessary. She volunteered to stay behind with the sisters and support troopers to oversee the mop-up, if the Ruppet would give her the authority to order limited orbital strikes. This seemed perfectly acceptable to all of us. It let us move out immediately, and our little old lady didn't really have any place chasing Cornet cults, so it was good that she stayed behind too. The Ruppet made a few calls, had a brief meeting with the sisters, then we started loading up our flyer for the trip.
Well, this thing didn't really go the way we expected, but that's come to be expected now, I suppose, in the Guard.
You work well, Doc.
I thank you. So do you.
Check to see what you can find, and if things get rough, you can reach me on this frequency.
Yeah, I surely will. Hope to see you soon. How do I...
We all snickered as Doc tried to figure out a way to hug her without contaminating her.
I'll see you later.
He didn't get to hug her, and he was incredibly mopey about it for the rest of the flight. Wasn't our fault. Our destination was a jungled area that was known for 2 things: being home to some of the biggest badasses on the planet, and for being absolutely filled with feral orcs.
Fucking orcs! I'm so fed up with bloody orcs!
Twitch was not happy, and repeatedly lobbied for simply burning the entire jungle from orbit. The Ruppet wouldn't have it, though. With the exception of the tribe we were heading for, the natives here were perfect recruits for the regiments. We didn't know the exact location of the tribe we needed to purge, but the surveyors had just mapped a large tribal settlement near the edge of the jungle, and filled the rest with "here be orcs." Lazy bastards. Without a clear idea of where to go, flying around the jungle would be pointless, so we landed near the single mapped settlement and asked around for a guide. We had expected terrifying mutterings and evasiveness from the locals when we asked about the tribe of Cornets, but to our surprise, everyone seemed to think that they were pretty cool guys. Apparently they had just been about the place and been the best fighters around, and would hire out themselves to other tribes in exchange for food and such. We guessed that being near a large concentration of feral orcs sort of biases one towards big angry guys that are willing to beat an orc to death with their own severed arm. It was pretty easy to get a guide after we explained that we were looking to hire a few of the Cornets, and before long we were headed out into the jungle behind a young tribal that Ruppet referred to as Umbubu. That was not his actual name. The Ruppet just called him that. If any of us put a list of things together that we wanted to be doing, marching through an orc-infested jungle towards the tribe of Chaos cultists would not be high on it. In fact, it would be down at the bottom, right between try to ride an angry Grox while naked and volunteer to assist a Magos biologist with his experiments. We didn't have any choice in the matter, though. The Ruppet wanted to go, so we had to follow.
I was actually the one that did the Grox riding.
Oh, fucking course you were.
We coped with our displeasure in traditional guardsman fashion, which is to say that we complained bitterly about everything.
I fucking hate forests. They're green.
And did our best to make sure that everyone else was as unhappy as we were.
And fuck you, Doc. You're ugly.
Yeah, I didn't do anything.
Exactly.
This may have been widely unprofessional behavior, but we felt pretty justified, though. We would have been riding around in our nice, comfortable flyer. But no, that would spook the quarry and draw the wretched greenskins in, and it was more sporting this way, and Umbubu would be fucking too scared to guide us. His name wasn't even Umbubu, it was Chris, and he was a boy that grew up in a jungle full of feral orcs. He wouldn't have batted an eye at something as tame as flying after what we had seen. No one listens to a guardsman. Everyone thinks they know better than us. Really though, the hike through the jungle wasn't that bad. The Arbite and Umbubu were good at scouting and breaking trail. We scuttered along the dens of several mutated animals, dodged an orc raiding party, and made sure not to touch any pretty-looking flowers. Things were just about ideal considering what we were doing, but we were still grumbled, and Twitch was in constant state of near panic.
I'm scared.
Twitch did not like orcs.
I don't like orcs.
Or cluttered lines of sight.
I don't like cluttered lines of sight.
Or loud noises.
I don't like loud noises.
Or sleeping in a position that hadn't been fortified over the last few days.
I don't like sleeping in a position that haven't been fortified over the last few days.
To top it all off, he was dead certain that someone was following us.
Something is following us, and I can smell that it's green.
And after a few days, the Arbite and Umbubu started agreeing with him.
No one listens to a guardsman. Everyone thinks they know better than us.
Umbubu said we were nearly to the tribe when the orcs hit us. A twig snapped, a brush rustled, and suddenly the Arbite went for his gun and Umbubu was gone. Guardsman instinct kicked in and we all dove for cover while Alfred pulled the Ruppet in the cleric behind a tree. The barrage of spears missed all of us, except for the greaseball, who now looked like a bit of a pincushion, but with some more blood and gurgling noises. The spears were immediately followed by a band of feral orcs, screaming and waving crude axes as they charged. The first few were blown into chunks by the grenades Twitch had tossed on reflex as he grabbed a cover, and the next batch was taken out by a barrage of last fire. But the last few managed to close to melee range before they could get out of sight. Cutter and Ruppet sprang into action, power and chainswords whipping across the rushing orcs. The moment they appeared, the entire hunting party focused on them, and we took what shots we could get. The fight was short and surprisingly one-sided. Cutter was an absolute beast at melee, and between his power sword and augmenting arm, the Ruppet could smash through the orcs' crude weapons. Both of them fought back to back, and any orc that hesitated to get near with a whirlwind of death, they were shot in the back by the rest of us. After the last orc ran for it and was taken out by a near shot of the Arbite, Umbubu dropped down from the trees, and we gathered together to take stock. None of us had been injured, but the greaseball was dead, and both the Arbite and Umbubu were sure more orcs would be coming to check out the noise. We were getting ready to double time it towards the tribe, when a pair of large men with swords stepped out of the jungle.
Now that I like.
Only a quick grab from Sarge kept Twitch from hosing the men with last fire. We all watched with weapons ready as Umbubu greeted the two tribals and introduced us. The men were remarkably restrained for cornets. Neither seemed inclined to rush us and scream for blood. Instead, with Umbubu's help, they told us to come now, children, and bring your skulls. As we followed them, several young tribals came out of the grove and started hacking at the dead orcs and the greaseball's corpse.
Why are nearly all of them naked?
Probably because they're uncivilized tribes.
Doesn't make it any less uncomfortable.
True that.
Hey, speak for yourselves.
Cutter, from this point forward, you're washing yourself in a different shower room. None of us was very comfortable with the situation, Cutter, but they were taking us to where we wanted to go, so we rolled with it. As we walked through the jungle, it thinned, and we started to see headless orcs strapped to the trees. As far as border signs went, it was pretty effective. When we finally reached the village, the first thing we all noted was a giant pile of skulls. It was bloody massive. At a rough guess, there would have been something like 5 million skulls in that pile. It was amazing that there were that many orcs left on the planet, much less in this jungle. We weren't sure how many years they had been adding to it, but if it was starting the day the planet was nuked, it was still damned impressive. A more educated observer, like the cleric or the arbite, might have made several notes about the tribal's cultural dress, or the lack thereof, and building styles and whatnot. All we noticed was the pile of skulls, and that everyone seemed to be 7 feet tall and carried a massive sword. Our 2 guides led us to a larger hut, instructed us to enter, and left. Inside the hut was an old man who looked like no cornet cultist we had ever seen. With Umbubo's help, he asked us if we were here to pay tribute, trade, or ascend. That last option caught our attention. We held a quick whispered debate and decided that there was probably no harm in asking what he meant by ascending. The old man clarified by asking if we had come from the lesser gods to test our strengths and journey to the Temple of Unity. Jackpot. Really, there was no way we would have said anything but yes to that. It was like walking into the armory and being asked if we were there to pick up the new assault bikes. Our answer caused a fair bit of excitement, and runners were sent out in every direction. Umbubo seemed to be about to try and clear up the confusion and explained that we were just looking to hire some mercenaries. But Alfred whacked him around the ear and told him to keep his mouth shut. What looked like the entire tribe gathered together and formed a ring in the center of the village. The old leader asked us who would fight for us to prove our worth. Both Cutter and Ruppert immediately stepped forward. There was another whispered debate as we tried to convince the interrogator to leave this to the close-quarters combat specialists. But before we could bring him around, the leader accepted and ordered both of them to remove their guns and enter the circle. As they entered, several tribals hauled a pair of massive cages into the ring and planted a massive sword in front of each of them. The men inside the cages were huge, not just tall and strong like the other tribals, but covered with so much bulky muscle that they looked more like orcs than humans. Both of them were vibrating with a berserk fury that we could practically feel. They were no longer sure that agreeing to this was a good idea. But an agreement was an agreement, and Cutter and the Ruppert actually seemed confident enough. Each man moved in front of a cage, raised their sword, and waited. The old leader made a short speech that Umbubo didn't bother translating. The crowd started chanting. The cleric reached for his flamer and had to be restrained by Doc and Crisp. Sarge had a quick word with Alfred, and with a clang, the bolts holding the cage closed were pulled out. The 2 berserkers surged forward, grabbed their swords, and swung at Cutter and the Ruppert. One could say that it was an epic battle, filled with masterful dodges and parries, wounds that left the combatants bloody but even more determined to win, and culminated in a brilliant counterstroke by the underdog. One could say that, but they'd be lying. It was more like a retarded bullfight. Yeah. Cutter dodged the first swing and a follow-up grab, set his chainsword to puree, and just ground it into the berserker's side as he strafed behind the giant. The berserker tried to turn and face him, but Cutter was much faster and just kept behind him while the sword dug deeper and deeper. We almost felt sorry for the cornet. His muscles were so thick that his arms couldn't even reach behind his back. His wildly swinging sword did keep Cutter pinned in close, but you don't need room to swing a chainsword after you get it going. That was more like watching someone cutting down an especially screamy tree than a fight. On the other side of the ring, the Ruppert was apparently adopting pacifism. There was no blood, there was no cunning ripostes, just a man standing there and parried or dodged every attack. It was annoying for both the berserker and for us in the audience.
The man would never take an opening. He just stood there. The Ruppet seemed perfectly willing to drag out the fight until Cutter was finished or the enemy died of exhaustion. We could all see the Berserker getting more and more frustrated. As the fight wore on, he switched to massive charges in an attempt to overwhelm the smaller man. Of course, the Ruppet neatly sidestepped these, and to everyone's disgust, actually let the Berserker get back up after a particularly wild charge. Just as the audience was getting ready to lynch our dandy interrogator, the Berserker seemed to trip over his own feet mid-charge and stumbled face first into the flailing sword of Cutter's opponent. Well, that's one dissatisfactory way of dying. The fight ended pretty quickly after that. Cutter finished biscuiting his enemy, and the interrogator finally gave in on our shouted instructions and decapitated the twitching remains of his Berserker. He had a sour look in his face, like someone had taken his favorite toy away or insulted his choice of wines.
Rascals! Never understood the art of the blade that I've studied for a long time.
That is the faggiest shit I've ever heard.
As we all walked forward into the ring, we could hear him muttering about it being poor sportsmanship to end a duel so early. Sarge quietly thanked Alfred for saving our interrogator from his own sense of fair play. When Cutter's Berserker had finally stopped thrashing around, we all stood before the Elder. An especially large man with a mark of corn carved into his chest came and stood before us, and a rather surly Umbubu half-acidly translated speech from the Elder. It was mostly about the glory of chaos and the Big Mother's place in our group as the guide to the Temple of Unity and the champion of the Blood God. But there was, also a bit about leaving immediately and only taking those who would be ascending on the journey. Yeah, this ain't gonna be nice, is it? We paid Umbubu, who was still a little sore at Alfred and the Ruppet, and sent the closest thing we had to a translator back home. Crisp slipped the kid a few ration bars and his spare snub pistol. The whole squad had liked the little guy. As he left, he waved us off and yelled several insults at the Ruppet, who couldn't understand a damn word, and took a heartfelt goodbye. Then we made a note of the village coordinates and followed the big cornet out of the village, while all the tribals cheered at us and chanted about blood and skulls. We felt a little awkward when we called in the village's location and scheduled an orbital strike for later that week, but the cleric told us that such feelings were accursed by the taint of chaos crawling at our minds and prayed for our souls. We ignored him. We spent a few more days hiking through the jungle behind the cornet towards the Temple of Unity. It was actually a pretty nice companion if you ignore the whole sworn warrior of the demonic god of war and bloodshed thing. He would break trail all day long, didn't complain that none of us really spoke his language, and was happy to kill every mutant beast we ran into. It didn't even seem to mind when the cleric tried to kill him, just watched as we all wrestled the flamer away from the nutcase and then went back to eating. Crisp really seemed to enjoy talking to him, though. It finally found someone who truly appreciated his macabre stories, or at least the gesture and tone of them. They both stayed up and talked late at night and laughed, and with no idea what the other one was saying. Hell of a guy, that cornet.
Du kommer få den blodiga örnen och offras till våran gud.
I have no idea what you're saying, but I like you. I really do. Seems like you and I are going to become great friends.
I'll shift them.
We kept in touch with the Adept and the survey base using our long-range Vox. From the sound of it, the Adept and the sisters were just about done with the Nurgle cult. It was just a matter of hunting down the ones who had fled the settlement. That Vox unit was a bitch to carry, but it was worth it to keep up to date on what was going on and make sure that a record of our discovery survived. We were hoping that once we found the temple, we would call in another orbital strike and call it a day. But as we approached it, the Vox started running into interference, and eventually became completely useless. We still had to carry the heavy thing, though. The day after the Vox unit cut out, we reached the Temple of Unity. The cornet seemed almost reverential as he entered the clearing, and to be fair, the temple was pretty damn impressive. Damned being the operative word, the place hurt to look at. It was mostly stonework that looked ancient as hell, but more recently it had been covered with all sorts of spikes and the eye-watching sigils of each of the 4 Chaos Gods. It looked like we had found our final cult. While we took in the sight of the Chaos Temple, the cornet planted his sword in the ground, went to his knees, and started to pray.
Jag ger mig själv till makten som står över mig, all makt och tyngel, vår befrielse. What the fuck?
Wait a minute.
Oh, holy shit, you shot him!
And in the back of the bloody head while he wasn't looking.
Do you have a problem with that?
No. But he might.
Oh, you old poor fool. Oh boy. I'll see you in hell. While the cornet's eyes were closed, the cleric drew his hand cannon, took careful aim, and blew the guy's head off. This caught us all off guard, and Twitch had his gun halfway out before we figured out what had happened. The Ruppet was rather seabrick, and we all expected Crisp to fly into a rage. But the portly flame trooper just laughed and shook his head at the whole situation. None of us was very happy with the cleric after that. Sure, it needed to be done eventually, but he had been rather unilateral about it. None of us had even been consulted. To make matters worse, the edge of the clearing was now covered by a darkly glowing barrier that Alfred told us not to touch. Without the cornet, we had no way to get out. So with no exit and no functioning Vox to call reinforcements, with our only real option was to go in and kill everyone. The cleric heartily approved of this plan, and we all told him to shove it.
So, we've got a Chaos Temple. Got ourselves a lot of people inside that temple, most likely. It's going to be quite the big fight. So I say, Sarge, what's your order?
I'll tell you what we're gonna do. I'll tell you all what we're gonna do. Up until this point, we've been doing everything wrong. We've been going various approaches, trying to sneak in, disguises, pussyfooting around the entire damn thing. But not this time. This time we're not gonna conceal any goddamn weapons. This time we're not gonna conceal our intent. They know why we're here. We've come for the one thing that the God Emperor has put us on this galaxy to do. Purge.
All right.
Now we're talking.
That was it.
For the Emperor.
The heavy flamer and the grenade launcher were brought out. Dozens of hand grenades were divided between us all, and Twitch strapped on his entire supply of explosives. We all prayed to the Emperor that we'd have time to recon the entire temple and set traps before the fighting started. Because if a stray shot hit Twitch now, we'd all be blown to very small pieces. The Ruppet was in charge of the operation, of course, but for once common sense seemed to be triumphing over his love of epic battles and heroic charges. As the only remotely sneaky member of our group, the Arbite was sent forward to scout the area, while the rest of us stayed in cover. As he snuck around the temple, a basic plan was formulated by the Ruppet and delivered along with an inspiring speech about dying for the Emperor.
I've already done that. Oh, you're still doing it.
Once the main entrance and as many side entrances as possible were located, we would all move up to our position with a clear line of sight. After that, Twitch, Crisp, and Cutter would move to each of the side entrances and plant mines, while the rest of us provided cover. When that was done, we'd blow open the front door, heroically charge into the temple, and give Johnny Chaos a taste of Imperial justice. We were a little iffy on the last part, but mining the door seemed like a good idea, so we went with it. The plan actually held together for a surprisingly long time. The Arbite finished his sweep and got into a sniping position on a high set of ruins, while we moved forward, and Twitch's party split off. Mines were planted, remote death packs were placed, and there was no sign of the enemy as they moved from door to door. Twice, the main party had to rebase to keep overwatch on Twitch. As we moved out to our third position, we finally spotted movement. We could all see someone moving below us. The question here was whether we would let him pass by and hope he didn't notice anything, or try and silently take him out. While we quietly debated this, the Ruppet sprang to his feet, yelled,
What how thou foul heretic?
and sent a hail of bolt rounds at the figure.
Well, the motherfucking
The cleric leapt up next to the Ruppet and fired as well, while Sarge, Doc and Alfred shared a put-upon look. The figure moved with surprising speed towards our position, dodging from cover to cover and drawing a bolt pistol and a sword as he ran. It was even odds whether he'd make it up to us before our interrogator or cleric scored a hit, but luckily the Arbite had a clear shot, and a nice leg wound knocked the target down long enough for us to finish the job.
Shit! Don't drop it! Nearly dropped one of these. Would have blown us all up.
Yeah, and I would have killed you for it.
Down on the ground, Twitch nearly killed his entire group when the bolt fire surprised him in the middle of mining a doorway. He managed to recover, though, and used his comm to cuss the entire team out until he was interrupted.
This is Sarge. What do you want?
Oh, you piss-stained excuse for a soldier. What the bloody hell are you doing, you absolute cunt? You were sitting there ain't fucking skinning the living shit out of me. I was nearly about to bloody place from him, you.
You feeble morsels entertain me ever so. Welcome to my humble temple, dedicated to the true gods of existence. Isn't it magnificent in its own way? But you have not come to behold its beauty. No, you have another purpose here, and I am thankful for your arrival. We have been awaiting a worthy sacrifice. All aspirants, take care of our guests. The servants of the corpse god has arrived, and any survivors you care to spare, bring to me.
Twitch ain't got time for your shit. Listen, you're gonna have cultists on your ass in a second. Get ready and get ready now! Rest of you, prepare for a fight. This is not gonna be pretty.
We all started to hear shouts and chants rising from the various entrances around us. We did not have a good feeling about this. So no shit, there we were, sitting on top of a chaos temple in the middle of the jungle, surrounded by demonically powered warriors baying for our blood. We had a nice elevated position in a line of sight of half of the temple, but several of the unmined doors were on the other side of the pyramid that we were standing on, and Twitch's party was completely exposed. There wasn't time to panic. The enemy was coming fast, and we had to get ready for a multi-directional attack.
Bloody Sarge saying those things are on the way. Can't hear a bloody thing on the merry way.
Yeah.
Son of a bitch's line or something.
I don't think... Oh. What? Oh, Soka!
Oh, it is real!
It is real!
Twitch finished setting his last mines and bolted for a jumble of ruins with Crisp and Cutter on his heels. Doc and the Ruppet and Cleric ran around to the cover in the far side of the pyramid, while Sarge settled into position with Alfred and the Ruppet. The Arbite was ordered to relay enemy positions and open fire if he saw hostiles that we couldn't deal with. The first aspirant came out of a doorway on Doc's side of the pyramid. He and the Cleric immediately opened fire and managed to kill the target before he got 10 feet. Seconds later, we heard the sound of 2 sets of mines going off, and the Arbite reported cautious movements in several other 9 doorways. Twitch wasn't going to give them time to disarm his mines or fall back.
You want to tinker with my mines, do ya? Let's see if you enjoy this. Who the hell are you?
He hit his remote detonator and the entire temple shook as half of its exits were sealed. We were pretty sure that the explosions or falling rubble killed a bunch of hostiles, but there wasn't time to celebrate since aspirants were pouring out of the remaining side doors as well as the main entrance. What followed was a complete Charlie Foxtrot. These weren't anything like the Chaos cultists we had fought before. Each of them were as well armed and well disciplined as they could possibly get. They were a lot like the traitor god we had fought back in the regiment, but bigger, stronger, faster, and full of demonic tricks. Some were supernaturally fast and dodged between shots as they dashed towards us, whilst others just ignored their wounds. 2 of them marched up to the side of the pyramid, shrugging off last fire and hosing Sarge's positions with bolt rounds. It took a pair of headshots each from the Arbite to stop them.
Sarge, they're coming onto us too!
I told you this was gonna be one hell of a battle. Get out of there, now!
Doc and the Cleric were the first ones forced out of position. Doc was doing a pretty good job of covering the doorways, and the Cleric's handy flamer kept the flankers away. Then one of the aspirants started glowing, and the lightning that it shot blew apart their cover, and only a quick dive saved Doc from following suit. He and the cleric fell back towards Sarge's position, and as they retreated, a pair of aspirants with chainswords came after them. Doc landed several good shots as he ran, but none of them were enough to stop the swordsman, and right as they reached the top of the pyramid, the cleric turned and made his final stand. The closer of the two aspirants were immediately toasted, and the cleric turned towards the second, but a man with a flamer on top of a pyramid is a damned obvious target. A round caught the cleric in the leg, and the next burst went wild, only glazing the oncoming swordsman. By the time Doc had turned around, it was over. The cleric was dead, and 300 pounds of flaming chaos cultists was charging straight at the wiry medic.
Oh dear. Last rites. You were a son of a bitch or you would be missed. Goodbye.
Doc dodged to the side in the nick of time, and the burning aspirant rocketed off the pyramid and started a bone-shattering journey down to the bottom. A second later, Doc overbalanced and followed him a little more slowly.
No, dear. Fuck you, Irie!
Down on the ground, Twitch's team was holding their little ruined structure against all upcomers. Cutter and Crisp kept the entrances secured while Twitch took shots at anyone climbing the pyramid and tossed the occasional grenade. The enemy made a few attempts to push inside the small structure, but each time they were met by a wall of burning promethium or were hit with a chainsaw the second they entered the door. Between his last fire and ran of grenades, Twitch made it almost impossible for the aspirants to pass his little firebase. He was a constant thorn in their side, right up until one of them fielded a grenade, then tossed it back.
Come on, you sons of bitches! We've got you all day long!
The grenade almost made it through the window Twitch was under. It was a bit high, though. The nade, however, went off right where the roof met the wall, and with a groan the whole structure started to collapse. All three guardsmen ran for the exit, but only Crisp made it clear. Cutter and Twitch were both pinned by falling stonework, mere feet from the exit.
Fuck, we're pinned!
Oh no,
You have to help us, Crisp! Come on, do something important, sucker!
Don't worry, boys. I've got you. I'm gonna get you out of there.
Stop fucking laughing!
Up on the pyramid, Sarge was doing the most damage by far with his grenade launcher. From his elevated position, he could drop rounds on any aspirants who stayed on ground level. Only a few who managed to start climbing the pyramid were safe from him. Alfred and the Ruppert were doing a good job of keeping the enemy pinned for Sarge to finish, and between the Arbite and Twitch, anyone who managed to get into the pyramid was quickly sniped off. Every once in a while, Alfred would point out an aspirant that was glowing or out of staff, and everyone would redirect fire before something warpy happened. Things were looking pretty good. Sarge could see that the enemy was bogged down and running out of reinforcements. Then Doc came tumbling down the pyramid and landed at Alfred's feet. As the Ruppert and Alfred got ready to pick up incoming flankers, there was a grinding crash and the ruins Twitch was in collapsed, leaving only Crisp, combat capable, on the ground.
Son of a bitch, Cutter and Crisp is inside that structure. Arbite, I need you to snipe off any son of a bitch that is trying to get their way towards the ruins. Do as I say immediately.
Thinking fast, Sarge switched targets and rapid-fired the last of his grenades at the few remaining hostiles near the collapsed ruins, then ordered the Arbite to cover Crisp. As he reached for his last gun, the first two aspirants that came round the corner of the pyramid were dropped by Alfred and Ruppert, but no one was ready for the third. To his credit, Sarge got off a shot before the charging cultist landed on him, but it just didn't hit anything. A few thoughts filtered through Sarge's mind. He wondered why nothing ever worked as he planned. He wondered why he kept getting crushed on his chest, and if he needed any augmentic ribs after this mission and the previous one. Finally, he wondered if he should do something about the chainsword swinging towards his head. Sarge brought his lasgun up just in the nick of time to block the chainsword. The Guardsman's lasgun is a multi-purpose weapon that performs well in several types of combat. This wasn't one of them. The aspirant's blade started ripping through his lasgun with a horrible grinding noise, and as the wiring teeth neared Sarge's face, he summoned every bit of strength he had left, planted his feet in the Heretic's stomach and crotch, and heaved. For the second time that day, an aspirant tumbled down the pyramid. This one didn't just bounce to the bottom, though, for as he started to fly down the edge and begun his descent, the last two surviving hostiles that had been pinned on the ground started running up the steps. In an ideal galaxy, the falling aspirants would have crashed into the other two, and all three would have landed in a pile at the bottom of the pyramid, and then exploded. Unfortunately, this isn't an ideal galaxy, and both of them was taken out. But while there was no explosion, the activated chainsword both aspirants were holding had about the same effect. The surviving heretic continued to charge upwards and reached Sarge's position at the same time as the sorcerer came up over the top of the pyramid. Suddenly, Alfred screamed out and stepped in front of the sorcerer and began to glow out a shield with whatever little power he had left. The sorcerer's lightning bolt smashed into the shield and Alfred collapsed to the ground unconscious. The Ruppet's reaction was perfect. He didn't try to dodge the oncoming bolt. The man had perfect faith in Alfred's shield. And as calmly as if he were on the firing range, the dandy interrogator took aim and blew the sorcerer's head off. Behind them, the last aspirant cleared the ledge and took aim with his bolter. Sarge was down to his holdout pistol and combat knife, but he was ready for this. Before the heretic got his shot off, Sarge put 6 inches of good old-fashioned imperial steel into his eye and emptied his stub pistol into the man's gut. And just like that, the fight was over.
Alright. How many hostiles left?
None as far as I can see. All hostiles has been dealt with.
Good. Good. Twitch, Cotter, are you alright?
Yeah, we're alright. She's still a little bit squished underneath all this fucking rubble. I think something's broken though.
That's my cock.
Right, that explains it.
Nice. Everyone's alive.
Not entirely, Sarge. We lost the cleric.
Good riddance.
The Arbite calmed and told us all hostiles had been eliminated, and one by one the squad reported in. Doc had a broken arm and a concussion, and Alfred was completely out of it. Cutter was unharmed, but was trapped in the collapsed ruins, and Twitch was buried up to his waist in rubble, and might have a broken leg. We think it's the leg. Crisp was relatively unscathed and was trying to dig Twitch out, and no one had even shot at the Arbite, the lucky bastard. While the Ruppet held a merely unconscious Alfred and loudly mourning his passing, Sarge pointed Doc's last gun and took stock. We were down to 4 combat-effective men. The grenade launcher was out of rounds, and there were 2 wounded and 2 trapped men that would be needing looking after. The fight was won, though, and no one had died. No one important had died. All that was left to do was to go inside the temple and purge whatever was in it.
Well, we've made it. Please don't tell me that wasn't the temple door opening.
Well, it seems like I have to take care of the cattle myself.
Sarge eyed the big main temple doors unhappily. As he watched, there was an ominous grinding noise and the doors swung open. A giant figure stood out. It was 9 feet tall and wearing green and blue power armor with spikes on it.
I fucking hate the 41st millennium.
Those of us who could still move dropped back into cover and held still. This was not a fight we wanted to have. We were wounded and spread out, and only had an anti-infantry weapon on our hands. We probably couldn't even dent the big bastard's armor, much less kill him. In our book, the ideal weapons for fighting a space marine was rangefinders, Vox units, and a nearby artillery battery, and if that wasn't available, a Lehman Russ might do in a pinch. We were not going to try and fight this traitor marine with nothing but lasguns unless we had to. The marine moved forwards, occasionally kicking a dead aspirant out of the way as he walked towards the base of the pyramid. Once there, he stopped, and we all held our breath. Then a booming voice that we all recognized from the Vox came.
You have murdered all my aspirants. If you are as great a warrior as you appear to be, you will face me. So come and fight like men, instead of cowering like children.
We all decided to get in touch with our inner child and did our merry best to merge with the ground.
Does no one want to come out? I merely wish to reward you for the glorious combats that you have provided. You've done well in killing all of my aspirants, and I merely wish to provide you with a true warrior's honor. Come and speak with me.
Not only had we done well in killing all of his aspirants, but he was going to offer us a chance to take their place. The Arbite chose this moment to shoot him in the back. Faster than any of us could track, the Marine spun around, hefted his bolt and fired. We all winced as we heard a wet smacking sound, and the Arbite's comm cut off. Poor dumb bastard. The Marine calmly turned back towards the pyramid and resumed his pitch.
Now, where were we? Ah, yes. My award to you. I understand that man acted on his own principle. He was blind in faith. He thought that he could kill me, a servant of a true god's existence. No, he cannot, and neither can you. But I'm not here to offer you death. I'm here to offer you a reward. True salvation. Think of it. What has your corpse emperor provided you? Sanctity after a battle? Provisions when you needed it the most? Or a loving father looking down on you with a smile in your dreams? They're lies, humans. You know this just as well as I do. That's why I left his side. But you can join me. I do not have to murder you, like you murdered my own kin. You can be my new kin. And if you do, I will offer you true gifts. Gifts of immortality, strength beyond any human. You will be able to live for as long as you choose. You will have the finest weapon the galaxy has never laid its eyes on. And I will be your humble master, far kinder than any inquisitor would ever be to you. What say ye? Come and deliver your answer.
That was a tempting offer. Immortality, superhuman strength, a good medical plan, a tremendous upgrade in weaponry, and a chance not to get shot by the traitor Marine. It would have been a nice deal, if it weren't for the whole swearing your soul to chaos thing. The Ruppet was getting more and more agitated as the Marine talked. The man wasn't a complete idiot, but he was proud, and he didn't have an ounce of pragmatism in him. After the third or fourth time, the traitor told us the Emperor is nothing but a rotting corpse and recommended that we swear allegiance to a real god. Something inside our interrogator snapped, and for the second time that day, he rose out of cover and opened fire while we scrambled to stop him. The Ruppet's shots were well aimed, but the Marine was blindingly fast. He sidestepped most of the bolter's rounds, and the only one that hit merely dented a pauldron. Once again, the Marine raised his bolter and returned fire. Sarge barely managed to catch the Ruppet's leg in time. He gave it a mighty yank, and the Ruppet crashed to the ground and missing an arm instead of a head. It was the remaining flesh arm, too. The man curses a blue streak while Sarge tied off and dragged him back towards Doc. Down below, the Marine laughed and asked if he needed to come up there and lend a hand. When Sarge turned him down, he laughed some more and asked what we thought of his offer. Sarge expressed interest in his pitch and decided to subscribe to the Marine's newsletter, then asked for a few minutes of, mulling things over. Down in the ruins, Crisp was watching the Marine and relaying everything to Twitch and Cutter. Twitch was wildly brainstorming ways to get his reminding dead packs onto the Marine, and Cutter was contemplating that this was all bullshit and someone needs to dig him out. Crisp just sat there and quietly laughed at the situation. It was all completely ridiculous. He laughed when the Arbite died, he laughed when the Ruppet lost his arm, and he nearly collapsed when Sarge made a crack about the newsletter. He also laughed when Twitch and Cutter was underneath the rubble and tried to save them. He removed his combead when Sarge told him to be serious or be quiet. Eventually, the Marine ran out of patience. He gave us one last chance to join him before he started killing us.
Yeah, no, we're just gonna check things over just a second. Right, how the hell are we gonna... Chris?
Where are you going?
You'll see.
The rest of us were floored. Both Sergeant Doc scrambled up to get a view as the portly flame trooper holstered his weapon and walked towards the traitor Marine. We all started shouting. Doc pleaded for his soul. Sarge barked orders in a most threatening, commanding voice. Cutter asked what the fuck was going on, and Twitch called him Traitor McTraitorpants and swore that he had known all along. Crisp ignored us all. As he walked, he laughed and talked to the Marine. He talked about the death he had seen and laughed. He talked about the death he had dealt and laughed. He talked about the faithful men who had died and laughed. He talked about his prayers that hadn't been answered and laughed. He talked about immortality and the glory of living forever and laughed. Finally, he talked about madness and laughed like we had never heard him before. The Marine laughed too, and assured him that in the service of the Dark Gods, madness has purpose. He welcomed Crisp as a future brother, and asked us all to follow our squad mate's example. Every one of us screamed at Crisp as he was walking towards the Marine. When he finally stopped in front of the traitor Astartes, we all fell silent. There was a brief second when there was no sound other than Crisp's laughing. Then Twitch hit his detonator.
See you guys.
Every single one of Twitch's remaining dead pegs was stuck to the back of Crisp's flamer tank, and the tank itself was at the least half full. The explosion shook the entire temple, and Sarge could feel the heat of flames from his position near the top of the pyramid. There weren't even bodies left, just little fragments of ceramite and a few puddles of burning promethium. We all fell silent and just watched the flames for a few minutes. Then the Ruppet asked what happened, and we all snapped back to reality. Doc needed his whole kit to treat Ruppet, not to mention his own wounds. Twitch and Cutter both needed to be dug out, and Sarge was adamant that we would find a way to contact someone and tell them just what sort of crazy shit was going on. Sarge went and grabbed Doc's bags from the stash, then went to work with his entrenching tool on the masonry trapping Twitch and Cutter. Eventually, everyone was collected and stable, and it was time to decide what to do. There really wasn't a lot of options. We had to go inside the temple. Our Vox unit still wasn't getting through, so we needed to see if there was a better one inside. Doc wanted to see if they had a real medbay, and we definitively couldn't find a way through the glowy wall up there. We all just hoped that there was nothing else still running around inside. We were tired of this shit. All of us formed up behind Twitch and Albert, and went through the big front doors. We had expected there to be blood, corpses and spikes and demonic runes everywhere. The runes were there, but after the first few dozen feet of stonework, the place was surprisingly clean and ordinary looking. It wasn't even dark. There was a tasteful little skull-shaped lights every few feet, just like at HQ. Nothing attacked us while we walked through that, and we began to think of this as the facility instead of the temple. Apparently everyone who had lived and worked here had died in the battle. We found various training rooms, sleeping quarters, an armory full of identical bolters and chainswords, and even a perfectly normal mess hall. We didn't touch any of the food, though. None of us found anything really interesting until we got to the med bay. Then we entered, and Doc froze and made a sort of high-pitched wheezing sound. Even the rest of us could see that this place was incredibly well equipped. There were all sorts of shiny machines and tubes and shit. After Doc got over the sheer quality of the medbay, he commandeered Cutter as a nurse and went to work on his arm, as well as the Ruppet's bloody stump.
Another system.
We left him to it while we checked on the nearby rooms.
Fuck you, Doc.
The next room over gave us a little pause. There were several tanks with what appeared to be aspirants floating and hooked up in all sorts of tubes. After a short debate, we decided that perimeter security trumped preserving evidence and shot them all. But we made sure to hit as little of the facility machinery as possible. Duck was rather insistent about that. The room after that held something that stopped us all in our tracks. Twitch ran back to the Ruppet and asked what the Inquisition's standpoint on salvage was. He was rather disappointed when he was told he couldn't keep the fully loaded Thunderhawk we'd found in the vehicle bay, or any of its Hellstrike missiles.
I hate the god!
The rest of us were similarly disappointed when we realized that the Arbite had been the only one who knew how to fly. Eventually, we got into a room with a green snake-looking thingy on the door. This was the first one that was actually locked, but we got in after a little tinkering and finally found where the big Vox unit was kept. Long fucking last. There was a lot of stuff in there, but aside from a few armor tools and weapons, we had no desire to touch any of the stuff, because it didn't seem interesting to us. It took a while to get the Vox system working, but it seemed to punch through the interference with no problem. We dialed the sisters up and gave a brief rundown of the situation to the Adept. Then we went and got the Ruppet out of the medbay because she didn't believe us. No one ever trusts a guardsman. After that, it was a lot of talking and waiting. Messages were sent to the closest Inquisition base, orders were relayed to the survey base and the ships in orbit, and the remaining sisters were requisitioned to keep the place secure until a full Inquisitor arrived. There was a certain temptation to just blow up the facility, but it wasn't currently doing anything chaosy, and someone smarter than us really needed to take a look at this place. The sisters and the Adept arrived by air. They just flew right over the glowy wall, which still couldn't be figured out as to how the fuck we could deactivate it. We all set up camp as far away from the temple as possible and covered it with as much holy stuff as the sisters could bring. The Adept said that the Chaos runes wouldn't have any serious effects, but we didn't want to take any chances.
Oh no. By the Emperor. Doc, are you okay?
Don't worry. I'm gonna be fine. I'm actually pretty alright.
Well, this won't do. Let's get you to the medbay.
No, why would you do that?
So I can patch you up.
Well, now that I'm thinking of it, I might actually need a hand.
We kept busy for the next few weeks while we waited for the investigation team. Doc spent a lot of time with the Hospitaller, who was full of sympathy for his broken arm, and helped him with everything.
Look, I'm very thankful for you helping me, but I think I can try and stand up a little.
No. You, Doc, stay in bed. I'll get it for you.
Fine then.
Mm-hmm. Good boy.
Well done. Carter found out how to activate the training remotes in the facility and spent most of the time hitting things with his sword. Sarge made Twitch help him clear up the bodies and fragments of Chaos Space Marine that littered the area, and the Ruppet went over the whole facility with the Adept. Eventually, the team we requested arrived. We were surprised to see not one, but 3 Inquisitors step out of the shuttle, followed by a Space Marine in black armor. The next few days were a blur of interviews which all found incredibly uncomfortable, especially when the Astartes kept asking how we killed the traitor Marine. That guy made us all very uneasy, and Twitch started muttering about Chaos Marine infiltrators. Sarge hit him and told him to shut up before he got us all purged. There was a lot of talk with the overhead, but didn't pay much attention to it. There was a bunch of stuff about alphas and legions and recruiting worlds and genes and seeds, and none of it really concerned us. We just hung out until they decided that they were done with us, and they tell us to get the hell out of there on the first Navy ship going back to Oaks Way. To our surprise, we weren't the only passengers on the ship. The entire batch of sisters had apparently seen too much and was being called to inquisitorial service. The Sister Superior and her squads would be joining one of the Inquisitor's retinues, but he had no real need for a Hospitaller and sent her off to be one of Oak's assistants. Doc was incredibly happy about this. We'd been dreading how mopey he was going to get when it was time to go, but this was almost worse. The man was a complete sap and none of us could stand talking to him during the trip home. We couldn't even tease him properly. He just sort of dreamily nodded anything we said. Eventually he just rearranged the cabin so that they were next to each other and left them to it. At least one of us was getting some. The trip back went quickly though. Sarge spent most of the time in medbay with the Ruppet and the Adept getting in the report in order for Oak. This one was a doozy, and it sounded like a story you'd hear in a bar. But the other Inquisitor's report backed it up, so hopefully Oak would believe us. We all speculated about whether he'd try to promote Sarge again, or if we'd all get an increase in pay or something. Not every team can take down a frickin' Chaos Marine, but hey, it's gotta give us some leverage. When we reached back to Oak's ship, Doc bid a tearful goodbye to the Hospitaler as she went off to the damned short boot camp Oak had put his recruits through.
Does this mean goodbye forever?
I don't know, sadly. We'll see.
Oh, well, I worry that... I worry that...
Don't worry, we'll see each other.
Why, you gonna cry like a baby?
Yes. Because I'm the biggest baby.
And for fuck's sake! It wasn't like she was being sent to the Eye of Terror or something. She was just being sent across the other side of the goddamn ship to be going in a training camp. Oh, the little simp. After that was done, we all went down to our section of the ship and filled in with the rest of the boys about Crisp. There were a lot of sad faces at the end of that story, but everyone agreed it was a pretty cool way to go. One of the other troopers said that Crisp had signed up with one of the death cults during the last mission, which really did explain a lot. We all drank to his memory and hoped he was laughing with Big E in the sky. The call down to Oak's office finally came, and we all got to stand there and look decorative while he talked with the Ruppet about the mission. This time there was no way he could turn down a promotion to full Inquisitor, even if he did need another medical leave to go to a second augmentic arm. The man glowed with pride as Oak praised him for not only removing the cults that kept the planet from being an excellent recruitment world, but also for finding and destroying a chaos operation that was using it for the same purpose. We all winced when he used the terms like level-headed and keeping your men alive, but overall the man deserved his praise. When the interview was over and the Ruppet finished swearing to come back for us after he got his new arm, Oak asked us to kick around for a few minutes. He kept it simple. He was very happy with our performance as a team and wanted to know if there were any requests we'd like to make for our future deployments. Twitch was about to say something along the lines of no psychers or clerics ever again, but Sarge hushed him and pondered on the question. Finally, he asked if the squad as a whole could be issued some more robust weaponry. The lasguns just hadn't been cutting it lately. And then, as an afterthought, he asked if Oak could see to assign a certain new recruit to permanent shipboard duty instead of sending her out on missions. Oak agreed and sent us on our way. Doc was practically skipping as we left. He might have been annoying on the way back, he might have been annoying the whole this goddamn trip with her, but everyone deserves some happiness if they have abilities to grab them. And he has two of them to grab. Good luck, old boy. We all headed out for some R&R. We talked with the boys, drank in the bar, and generally had a good time. Doc repeatedly made the several-hour journey to the training section of the ship, and we all gave him shit for it. A definite high point was receiving a crate full of hot-shot lasguns with a note that said, "Courtesy of Assistant Quartermaster Nubby." Oh. Eventually our time ran out and we started waiting for our next mission. We speculated about what sort of insane interrogator or crazy assignment we'd get this time. We had tons of theories, but none of them were close to what we actually got. Instead of a runner telling us to report to a shuttle or a personal visit from our interrogator, we got orders to report to Oak's office. When we entered, there was no one else there besides Oak and a single tech priest. There wasn't any long mission brief or bullshit about promoting Sarge again. Oak simply said that we had proven to be trustworthy men, and he was sending us to assist in procurement of a new ship for his recruitment fleets. We could be acting under his authority, and we expected to behave professionally. That said, he introduced the tech priest as the agent who would be handling the actual inspection and procurement, then sent us on our way. We followed the silent tech priest down the fancier-than-usual shuttle land and stepped inside, where we were met by a bunch of other cogboys who chatted away at their senior tech priest while we stood there. Eventually, someone noticed us, and a monotone voice directed us towards the side room, where we'd meet with the representative from Supply. Sarge opened the door and jumped backwards with a shout. There are some things that shouldn't be seen from less than a foot away, and Nubby's face was one of them.
Well, hello, gentlemen. Happy to see me once again?
You son of a bitch!
And that's where we are going to end this episode of the All Guardsmen Party. And now, it's time for the updates. So, if you're not interested, this is where it ends. If you are interested, here it comes. So, sorry everyone so much for not uploading this in a very long time, or generally not uploading in a very long time. It's been about 2 months since last time I fucking did something, and yeah, it was about 1 month ago that I should have uploaded the All Guardsmen Party, this episode you're seeing right now. To explain what happened, a lethal bug happened to my version of Audacity that caused the over half of the file to just corrupt, and I got very fucking sad, and because of that, yeah, I was pretty demotivated. And the thing is that over the course of the time that things have kind of been going down, I've been busy with other shit. The time simply was not enough to redo all that half in just one go, so I kind of just had to push it back a little bit. I didn't update about it because I've kind of just felt shit about not having finished it or anything like that. But, you know what, I'm simply not going to provide any more of the typical, a video next week, unless it's actually fucking done. It's far better that way, and it's just misleading, and I don't want to be misleading. It's been quite harsh during the current world circumstances, so I had to procure myself a second job, and I have. And, 2 jobs and studies. Not something you are going to easily be able to run a YouTube channel when you also have a girlfriend and friends to, think of as well. So, I hope you understand. But this is most certainly not the end of Warhammer. Warhammer Winter is approaching, and I have an idea of a little submission I'm going to do for then. But, is there going to be any more coming soon? Potentially. I have the idea of making a little horror story for you guys coming this weekend, with a little bit of luck. And it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to make than this one. Don't have to do a hell of a lot of voices. Some sound effects potentially, but not much more than that, most likely. Regardless, though, I hope to see you all next time. Do tell me in the comments below what you thought of this video. Please remember to like and subscribe, share the videos around, as it does help me a lot. And, don't worry. You'll all be getting your fair share of videos coming soon. And for the Patreons, don't worry. New episode of the Fireside Tangents is coming up right on the way. And as for updates on future shit, well, I just teased Warhammer to the rest of you all, but for the patrons, you'll get a little bit more of a knowledge as to what's going on. Alright, that'll be it for now. See you guys next time. Be at peace.